The question it asks is, how can we make it easy for our potential customers to say yes?
Yes, totally. Streamline the pathway, make it easier. And if you put a headline, I know I'm a headline guy, but if you put a headline right up at the top that is a simple value statement that that technical person agrees with, then they already say yes. And then as they go through reading your other bullets, then they're already thinking, yes, this person is aligned with me. So I love that. How can you just make it easier, ease the purchasing path? That's a great.
Right. Hey, fellow marketers and listeners. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Call to Action. I'm Janet Mesh, CEO and co-founder of Aimtal, and I am the host of the show. Very excited to be joined by my co-host today, Tucker Delaney-Wynn.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back.
All right, Tucker, we're back with another episode. And just as a reminder, Call to Action is Aimtal's show, and it's where we analyze and discuss trends, hot takes, tactics that's happening in the B2B marketing industry. So we're really here to share our knowledge with all of you in hopes that there's one thing that you can take away from this episode. So at the end of the episode, we will conclude and give you at least one call to action that you can take, bring into your company, try something out, let us know how it goes. So Tucker, definitely excited to jump into this episode today. As I mentioned, the topic we're going to be focused on talking about the importance of creating a strong brand messaging, kind of that foundation of who your company is, why it's so important, especially in the context of AI. We've been talking a lot about generative AI, the impact it's having. It's definitely moving and shaking the marketing industry and just honestly all markets across the world. And in terms of, I think what we want to talk about too, Tucker, what you call that is what's that kind of human connection, as we're adapting with technology and integrating this more into the way that we work, making sure that we still maintain that emotional connection. And we're also going to share our messaging frameworks that we use with clients. So we're going to dive into the trends as we always do, but get some really strong tactical stuff. I'm excited to get there. So yeah. Anything I didn't cover there, Tucker?
No, I'm really excited to dive in. I think we're seeing this rise in AI, but at the same time, this rise in demand for kind of personalized experiences. And so how do we kind of weave those two things together in a way that feels authentic and real from a brand standpoint? So very excited to dive into this today and talk about personalized messaging, that balance between automation and the human touch. Looking forward to diving in.
Okay, so we're going to kick things off as we always do. And I just love looking at research, data trends, charts, all that good stuff. So the first one we're going to take a look through is from Gartner. It is the top US consumer and cultural trends for 2025 report. So there's a lot in here. We won't be able to cover all of it, but just in the context of our topic today, we did want to bring up, the current conditions going into 2025 based on this survey that they did of companies. It is just United States consumers, just to clarify that. So we're talking in the context of the United States of America, but of course it's one of the largest economies of the world, so it has a pretty global impact. So just to focus here, not great news at all for 2025 look ahead. As we can see here, so it says consumers who say they trust big brands continue to decline. At the lowest here, it's the government, then corporate America, then big brands. Interesting to me is my community, but those that were surveyed identified as like my own community was in the third spot. And then it goes small brands after that and locally owned businesses. So just fascinating to see, actually, but also, an exciting opportunity. I think this just shows that there is a lack of trust. And, the state of the world, unfortunately, there's a lot of instability. And, I think some of this can look shocking, but at the same time, it's kind of not, unfortunately. And actually in the report, they also found that there are a lot of cultural shifts directly like impacting this in audience behavior. So they talk a lot about in the report of like, of course, inflation, increased cost of living, climate change are a lot of factors here where consumers are losing trust in brands, especially when they're not being direct to the customer, not, sharing information or lack thereof. So yeah, definitely a bit of a concerning way, but of course we're going to talk through how we can improve these things, Tucker.
Mhm. Yeah.
And also I guess we can go to the next one here. Consumers feel misunderstood was another one. So they're feeling like they can't trust brands and they're feeling really misunderstood. Quite the dichotomy there.
Quite the dichotomy. Yeah, and I think between this graphic and the last one, in the last one we see, so I think it's interesting, like you mentioned, Janet, my community, local businesses, small brands have a much higher trust score than those, big brands, corporate America. And as we, top of the call talked about personalization, thinking about, maybe the proximity of an institution or a group to a person seems to have a real effect. But that also says to me that people want that personal connection. People trust groups or communities where they feel like they're actually heard. And so I think even for big brands, there's a nugget in there that they can learn from and that we should be thinking of as we kind of guide and consult marketing across the world.
Right.
I love this graphic, the gets me gap. I think it's a really great way to think about this and honestly humanize some of the data we're looking at here. And I think it's interesting to kind of take a look and see, even that quote at the top, most companies are trying to sell me their products and services, and I don't really understand my preferences as a consumer. Something that I think often gets overlooked right at the top here is pain points. I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think there's that knee-jerk instinct to rush into talking about a product or value propositions and blow past what your audience is actually going through. But that's actually where you can really establish an emotional connection. And that's huge for getting your audience and personas to take action, for getting them to feel an affinity for you. If you're able to establish some sort of emotional connection, and I think based around a pain or a problem that they're trying to solve, that's a huge piece of this. So for me, when I saw that, right when I think about the gets me gap, if you don't get the problem that your audience is going to, I really don't think you're going to be able to connect with them around anything
Right.
else. So
Yeah,
that,
it almost like it reminds me too of like the meme culture. Like that's why it's so popular because you see a meme, you're like, oh, you get me. Like that's exactly how I feel when I show up to work or in my day to day or
yes,
so.
totally. And
Not that
also,
I'm saying I'm not recommending that every company should make memes, of course, but the point of it is that you're really just like hitting very directly on that experience of someone and saying it like it is.
absolutely, absolutely. I think memes are literally a shorthand, but they're a way to kind of cut through maybe something that feels a little more institutional, something that feels a little bit more cold and corporate, going back to that graphic of where corporate America is. You can do something that has some humor, has some simplicity, that
Right.
really speaks directly to the heart of a problem someone's feeling. I think that goes a really long way. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love that you brought that
Well,
up.
speaking of simplicity, I love that you just said that word and it was not planned, but it does actually bring us to the additional actually later in the same report, and they talk a lot about these like brand values, and they surveyed the same people and found that these, overall US consumers, like three brand values that matter the most to them are: one, simplicity, help me simplify my life; two, authenticity, like are you authentic and genuine; and then three, but actually like number one is value. Do you provide the best value to me? They're kind of defining it around like price, but I think value is a good representation of the overall experience of a consumer with a brand. Um, so curious what your thoughts are on this one, because you were just kind of starting to touch on this, so we can dive a little deeper here of, you know, how we're seeing this. And I think this is a really good representation of like thinking of it by specific audience as well. I think the rest of the chart too covers young consumers, older consumers, even key segments like families versus eco-friendly
Yeah.
folks or people who care more about convenience over something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, simplicity. Let's stick on that one for a second because I think it's so big. We work in B2B tech, and by nature, a lot of that is very technical. But I think a mistake that a lot of marketers make is thinking that therefore the audience wants very technical language and technical communications to them. I don't always think that that's the case. And
Yeah,
even
I think at some stage of the buying committee, you do need to have that technical know-how, of course, and like go head to head with
yes,
the CIO or others in the organization that need that level of detail, but that's not your kind of brand or even product campaign messaging you should lead with.
exactly. I think sometimes I see messaging and it's so technical from the jump. Adding a simple headline above your technical language, above your technical bullet points that explains the value, then you're contextualizing all the technical language that you're getting into. It's like, okay, they're checking the boxes of they know the technical know-how, but they also understand the higher level value that they're delivering.
Right. We're also
Um,
just hit with so much information.
yes.
It's so overwhelming.
Yeah,
It's
even if you have all the right technical information, if that's all you have, it's just a lot
right.
to parse through. Even for
Right.
a very technical person, it's like they already have enough technical stuff that they're going through in their own job. Looking at something with marketing that's very technical, they're like, I don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like how the question it asks is how can we make it easy
yes,
for our potential customers to say yes?
yes, totally. Streamline the pathway, make it easier. And if you put a headline, I know I'm a headline guy, but if you put a headline right up at the top that is a simple value statement that that technical person agrees with, then they already say yes. And then as they go through reading your other bullets, then they're already thinking, yes, yes, this person is aligned with me. So I love that. How can you just make it easier, ease the purchasing path? That's a great,
Right.
great way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's also what I think too of like this brand, the values
Mm,
is it's one, you communicate your values as a company with the intention of attracting other people, but you like that authenticity point is really important because it's not just to have there's so many companies in the world like like we have your core values and they just stick it on the wall or and they never look at them or they don't talk about them.
right.
And it's really is like what is your true authentic self as a company and how you represent that to your audience. And
Yeah.
honestly, if you haven't done the work on your company values, like prioritize that this year, please. Like we did that at Aimtal, and it's a really core part of how we operate and how we show
Yes,
up internally, but also for clients.
totally.
And if you need some inspiration, go. We can just jump back. We can show the slide again. But there you go. That Gartner report definitely hits on some that you can build off of.
Yep.
But it's not just about your company, I think is the point you're making, Tucker. It's you don't want to be overly self-promotional. Like as you're saying, it's not just about me, us, like buy our product. Like you obviously need this. It's like, no, people actually do need to be convinced in order to convert them. So
Mhm.
it's like you need to deeply understand who are these folks? Like
Yes.
what's their world beyond work? Like what's even going on in their day to day?
Right.
Where do they live and work online? Like in person? What content are they consuming? What are they not consuming? Like, who are they being influenced by?
Mhm.
I think to the point on emotion, like a lot of emotion comes as part of like decision making in business, as much as we want to think that, that's something separate. It's really not. But what better way to connect with that by tapping into that kind of like more human emotion in your own messaging as a company?
100%. I love what you're saying. It's like getting out of your own brand and your own company and mentality when you're creating marketing communications and getting into your customer's head. I'm kind of like militant about this, but whenever I write landing pages or when my team does, I never allow the word we or our on those pages.
Oh
Just
yeah.
we or our. And like I see so many companies leading with that, like we will provide you with innovative solutions, right? No,
Right.
it's always in the frame of you, yours, what are you as the customer, the buyer going to experience? And I think when you start writing and talking in the language of you and the person that you're actually trying to connect with, that really helps with that shift to get people to think about, okay, how do I connect with this person?
We're getting towards the how, but we want to spend a little bit more time into the why and the what before we get there. Because I can imagine people are like, well, how do I even get all that information?
Yes,
Which we'll
yes,
share in a moment. But
absolutely.
I did want to share another report that I found from Qualtrics, they did a state of brand experience management report, and they discovered 10 drivers of brand trust among global consumers. So pretty cool to see. We have like the US specific market, but now this is a little bit of a global perspective. So there's a lot on here. There's 10 listed. At the top says respects and protects customers' data privacy and security, really important. Good value for the price. I think they're talking in the context of like product. And then also like protecting my personal data. So there's a lot of weight behind protecting, the consumer's information online. However, the next like additional ones in the top 10, really interesting, is like kind of later on here. It says, I find these ones, maybe they're not as quantifiable, but I almost see them as a bit more like emotional or so. For example, one of them is treats customers well, even in tough times, consistently delivers on what they promise, or is reliable and dependable. So of course there's ways you can like quantify that with like customer service response times, or just in terms of actually delivering on, hey, this is our product, and in your marketing when they get the product, it's that's the experience. But I thought this was fascinating, Tucker, because there's just a lot of this resonates to me as a more subjective feeling or like approach to brand trust.
Yeah.
And like they're really high scores, like 70% of people surveyed like agreed on these ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easy when you're crafting messaging to think about like, oh, what's our like really unique value prop, or what's our kind of like core differentiator, whether you're thinking about product and feature or whether you're thinking about kind of more of that like value, qualifiable value. But reliability, as you just noted, Jen, it pops up like 3 or 4 times in here. And I think that's
Right.
another thing we don't want people to overlook, is just thinking about how are you conveying the sense of reliability and trust. Even the earlier bullets, people want to be respected around their data and privacy. That's also, people are looking to trust. I feel like that's a theme through all of these, is they want to feel like they can trust your company, your community. So how do you kind of infuse trust through all of your messaging? And that's just something that I think people really need to think about when they're doing this stuff.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So one way that I guess kind of getting into, just take like add some layers on to this now. It's like get established trust, have this like strong messaging, really clear like foundation. And there's a part of it where we talked about this on our last episode of like 2025 marketing predictions and trends. And part of it is that, as you just saw, people want to make sure that their like data is secure. They're not giving as much data and information, but on the other hand, they want the experience to be very personalized. Like it feels more trustworthy when the communication, when the experience is more personalized, which is a whole thing in itself. But what we're discovering and testing out at Aimtal is that we can use generative AI to help with kind of creating a more personalized, at scale messaging, communicating with their audience. But what's interesting too is that the challenge for marketers is they're finding that balance between the power of AI and building genuine trust pretty difficult. So I'm going to spend a lot of time here. I think obviously everyone's talking about this. We're looking into this, experimenting with like AI agents. I know we're getting really excited about the possibilities, especially we're talking about a lot of data. Like there's a lot of information out there about people. How do you like kind of take that, process it, and create these personalized experience? So pitching it back to you, Tucker, what your thoughts are on that first, and then I'll share some of mine.
Yes. So I think there's another instinct or these knee-jerk instincts or reactions to be like, ooh, we got to use AI. Just throw it in AI. Just start using AI. And I think sometimes I see that, especially in terms of creating content or generating content, that like, you use AI to generate content. A few things. One, I've heard, a phrase that I really like, that AI is an accelerant of what you already have. So if you've kind of got a bit of a mess behind the scenes, AI is just going to scale and, make it messier. I think building the foundations is really important. But I think outside of just generating content, you just noted this, Janet, AI is really great at gathering and orchestrating data, specifically customer data, whether that's already in your CRM or if you're going and grabbing it from, different data sources that you have. And I think that's almost a place that I would point people first before you start going off and trying to create new content using AI. If we want to be talking to the right audience, let's look at using generative AI to gather customer data, gather consumer insights that you can use to inform the content that you're creating and make it more personalized.
And I guess also to your point, like it's like you're saying is use what you already have, you've already are allowed to use, not like that's why you mentioned like if you have access to your CRM, make sure that people have already consented to that, and make sure you're processing in the right ways is really important. But for sure, and even things like this, like there are research reports where you can pull. That's what we've been doing. Like we're taking like all these research reports. It helps you like synthesize and analyze this information. Of course, you should probably read it yourself, but at the same time, like it saves you a few steps. It really helps you just to kind of understand a little bit broader and then into the detail. Absolutely. Of the experience of your potential customers and audience.
Yeah, and kind of as we're saying, just to bring some more data to the table, from Gartner, they had a recent marketing predictions webinar. This was one thing that jumped out to me, just that AI agents are becoming the primary source for doing exactly what we're talking about, gathering consumer data. 85% of it going to be collected by either automated interactions, think about a workflow in HubSpot, or by AI agents by 2027. So this really jumped out to me. And to me, this is just a huge shift in how we are researching potential buyers. It's no longer, okay, let me just have an SDR go and look them up on LinkedIn. Obviously, that's still useful, but a lot of that can be automated. And not just automated, but really organized really nicely. So it comes back to you.
For sure.
And if you can write the right scripts and prompts to kind of give you that information in a nicely palatable, digestible way, that's a huge help. All that said, humans still need to be very involved in this. I think, whether it's gathering insights and actually verifying like, hey, is this right? Does this actually make sense? Or certainly when you get to the stage of creating truly authentic and personalized content, that's where you absolutely still need a human to review, collaborate, edit, make sure it actually sounds human.
Right.
I think I still go back to the Inbound kind of keynote speech earlier this year in September 2024, where they said, AI handles simplicity and humans handle subtlety. And I think that has stuck around with me because it's really important, especially when you're crafting communications. There are subtle nuances that the human still needs to make sure are right.
For sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. And actually, in Gartner's consumer report, they also found that 72% of consumers actually worried about AI content being misleading. So I think just to your point, I agree completely. Like brands, to be authentic and honest and trustworthy, you need to be like upfront, like how you're using AI. I think it's also helpful. I think people want to know. It's almost a little bit of like gatekeeping the information. It's like, okay, like how was this created with a human and an AI? Like I think you could just kind of put a little disclaimer on it and just share like, yeah, we used it like a little bit of AI to help with the research or in these ways. Yeah. That goes a long way of just, sharing that kind of visibility into a little bit of the behind the scenes, but having that human oversight in the process is super important. And you did mention like prompting, and I love this concept, especially for marketers. Honestly, for anyone who's becoming like, there's like one skill to learn this year. It's like AI prompting, becoming like an AI prompt engineer. Because you need to tell and give the AI agent like exactly what you want and what to do. Like it's not pretty much, it's what you said, like it's pretty much trash in, trash out. Chris Penn talks a lot about this. He's a marketer and he talks a lot about generative AI and its impact and how to do these things. So I've learned a lot from him, which is cool. But as you mentioned, Tucker, like gathering and synthesizing all this information and data is exactly, I think, if you're not already doing it, is a really great place to start to like kind of start to build those foundations. And that's what we're going to get into. Like creating that really strong messaging, brand values, value propositions, the targeted messaging for the core audiences. Like we, on the one hand, we're talking about like kind of the content creation generation, but there's also like the training of the model too. Like just think of the AI agent as your direct report or your coworker or like the copywriter in your company, right? Like whomever it is, they need the context. Like they need the information. Like, okay, so what are our goals as a company? Like, how do we sound to customers? Like, what are we going to say in that situation? Should we
Right.
change the way we're saying that depending on who we're talking to? Like, it's the same concept, just applied in a different way.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's like another misunderstanding sometimes. Like
Yeah,
AI makes things easier and faster, but there's a lot of legwork that
a
humans need
lot.
up front, right? And this is something that we showing up a lot for our
Yeah.
clients as well. Like you really got to create that strong messaging framework, as you said, as you would for any copywriter who is on your team, so that they know, okay, I got to make sure I hit on these value propositions. I got to sound kind of witty, or I've got to sound very analytical. You've got to give that context so that when you're feeding the AI models, they understand what they should do and they can test it out. And I love that you brought up Chris Penn too, because we had the chance to see him at the Marketing Profs B2B Forum, and what a great presenter, but what a great framework. I think it's
Yeah.
the L framework of
Mhm.
how to kind of lay out how you want to prompt generative AI. And
Mhm.
certainly to me, that was a wake up of several steps you really got to take
Right.
here in order to really get it right. But when you do, you can just see how much more effective the output is.
Right.
Yeah.
But also that's where like too you can use like agents and gems. Like Gemini has, they call it gems, where you can create that to then save you time in the future. It's like you put in all that like legwork and then
Yes.
you can, save it and capture it in a way that you don't always have to prompt it every single time. So it's a pretty cool feat. Like it's really starting to accelerate, make things more efficient.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I agree. Like I think there's this like misconception too that it's like saving you a lot of time in some capacity. Yes, it will, but it does require still a lot of time and effort to even just get this foundational pieces, the data together. And to
Yeah.
your point before, Tucker, like that your data needs to be like your information needs to be strong. Like if it's a mess, and that's where we're going to start to see a lot of, I think, struggles for companies to adopt generative AI because their backend's a nightmare.
Yeah, you go into the CRM and you're like,
Yeah,
frameworks here? Do we have any like methodology for organizing things? Because otherwise, we're just going to pull up contacts that aren't really great fits, or we're going to pull up insights that actually aren't
right.
really what we're going after. So, totally agree. Got to
And then the
go.
consumer's like, you don't get me.
Yeah, it's like, well, you
Like
don't.
obviously, yeah, exactly. We don't.
Totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, well, just a final chart I wanted to bring up. This was like came out actually pretty recently, December 2024, not that long ago. But I mean, there's a lot. This is like a whole other thing about how Google is taking and surfacing this information, especially with AI overviews coming out. We talked about this in a past episode with Emily on our team. Would really deep dive like what this looks like and what it's going to mean for the future of Google and SEO and search optimization. However, when I saw this, I was like, wow, like I think there's a lot of talk about, you hear in headlines like how big these other companies are and how much they're growing and scaling. And it's true. They are taking over. I think we'll have to add DeepSeek into here, of course, as well. But look at that gap there, like with Google. They're still drawing some of the biggest Gen AI search destinations and information.
Yeah.
Even Gemini's owned by Google. Like still have a massive market share. So I
Mhm.
think it's also thinking in that context of like, is your data optimized? Like, is your content not just working for it's, but it's also not just for like the AI. We talk a lot like don't only create and optimize things for the AI models. Like that's not only what it's about. It's really what the point we're always making is it's about the people, making sure you're providing that to them in those ways.
Yeah.
But I just thought this was pretty fascinating when I saw this. I was like, wow, like think you hear a lot of different things in the industry or just like online on LinkedIn, but Google's still leading the charge. So I think people don't have to freak out so much if they're, pivoting to other places. Don't get too extreme with shiny object syndrome. The point I want to make is like, go back to your foundation, like your like the frameworks that you have, like are things strong for you to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. All right, Tucker, we talked a lot about why this is important, kind of this like we love to look at this like macro climate, what the kind of powers that be's, how it's influencing what's moving and shaking, trying to give some visibility here of where the market's moving, industry changes, and where to focus. So let's talk about that. I want to get into the how. So like how, okay, cool. You guys are talking about messaging and values. Like how do I even, where do I start? I guess is a good question. And how do I do the thing? So let's talk through that. Like I guess how we approach it at Aimtal for clients. We wanted to share that first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating messaging guidelines, you used this word foundation, Janet, and I think it's really foundational that companies do that even before they start a go-to-market strategy, before they start certainly running ads or putting things out in the market. I think the best companies we've seen either have messaging guidelines set up, or that's the first thing they do with us to get the foundation right, and then they start building out other things. So yeah, I think kind of just to kind of share a bit more, we obviously like to make messaging guidelines that are really collaborative and iterative. It's not something that you create and then set on the shelf or hide away in a Google Drive folder and never use again. The point is to make it very actionable and, updated quarterly, every 6 months. The way we typically start is by doing discovery sessions and just gathering ideas, opinions, interests from our clients. I have recently been using the phrase unfiltered brain dumps when I go into these discovery sessions. I'm just like, just do an unfiltered
Give it
brain
to
dump.
me. Give me all the trauma. Give me all the
Yeah.
authentic emotion.
But what I often find is when people are really unfiltered, that's when the real truth comes out, that's when the passion comes out, and that's when the nuggets come out that actually can translate into really key messaging. The other thing we do is listen to sales calls. Had an instance recently where a client sent it, I said, give me a bunch of sales calls, give me everything you got, listen through those. And the prospect on a call said something that just perfectly captured what this product did. I said, ooh, that right there. And that became the headline on a landing page. So it's just give us everything, getting all that information, hearing the stories about, the company, the values, the pain, the problem they're trying to solve. That's where we like to start. And then we'll start orchestrating that into a more cohesive messaging strategy and guidelines. So we can pull that
Right.
up to
Yeah.
show what it looks like. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that.
No, I think we can just get it right into it. So we look at this. I think this could look really familiar to a lot of people. We're not like, it's not rocket science, actually, but however, I think it's a really important framework to look at. We call it like universal messaging framework for the brand. You can also apply this to not just obviously, so we can do this for the brand, but then you can also do this for specific campaigns. So what's the specific messaging for that campaign? And then also like in the context of the audience, which we'll talk through in a moment. But to take it from the very high level, starting first, we'd like to call like messaging pillars. So like what are like 3 pillars? What are 3 like themes, like strong themes that you want your company to represent? I guess we can even say this is like the core values. What are the 3 core values that you want a potential customer, your audience to associate with your company? And so we actually put together a couple examples. So say this is for, a cybersecurity company. They may want to be agile, trustworthy, and optimized. Like when you think of the company and their product, that's what they want to evoke to their audience. And then we take it down a step. And to your point, the pain points of the target audience, this is really how we like to look at it. It's like, what are they struggling with? Like, how do you get from like this challenge to this like really high, mighty value that like you're going to improve their life? So we wrote some of these down, really thinking of like, what's kind of like the opposite of this like mecca of what you're going to solve for them. So for example, like if they want to be more agile by using your product, maybe right now the team's following a waterfall approach. They're planning everything out. The organization's really slow to adapt to change and innovation. Takes a long time to move things forward. Anything you want to touch on further there, Tucker, regarding the pain points?
I just can't hammer home enough how important these pain points are. Another tip I might say for anybody creating messaging frameworks, when you're doing pain points, sometimes we'll start by writing them out as I statements, literally, putting yourself inside the brain of your customer and be like, what is pissing me off? What am I so frustrated about? And writing those out like, I'm struggling with this. My job is on the line. Really trying to get emotional here and identify those pain points that have you tearing your hair out. That's a hard thing for me to pretend, but yeah, that's just so important. And also for any copywriter or anyone out there, if they don't know these pain points, they're not going to be able to write anything.
Also in sales, like I think it's even more important for the sales team. It's like if you don't understand like what the problem they're having, like you can't talk to them about what you can do for them.
Yes, and this is actually where I think going back to discovery, it's so important because what I find is that salespeople know these pain points intrinsically. Like they just know it, and it's kind of like, of course, these are the problems.
Right.
But it's really important to have them say it out loud, put it on paper, so that we can very accurately articulate those pain points to marketers who are going to help the sales team. So that's where it's kind of like, sometimes I find myself really pulling the thread with the sales team to be like, but really, what's got them tearing their hair out? So
for sure. Yeah. And then that goes into like the value proposition. So then like what's the value actually providing through your product, your company, your team to your customer? Like what's pretty much what are you promising to them? So stay in like the agile, you can read a bunch of these examples here, but keep in focus on agile. It's like, okay, the value proposition is with our product, you can cut deployment time from months to days or weeks to days.
Yes.
And that's, it's like, okay, awesome. Like how? Let's do it, right? And that's really where like the meat and potatoes of your campaign and your selling and all that, this messaging as a compilation comes together. And then finally, we like to, as you were mentioning, like the like I statements, there's a few more things that like you can obviously like add in here. You can go like a bit deeper, but we find that these are like the core areas that you really want to flesh out and kind of just go. We first provided like a couple examples for each one, but we usually write like 30 per section, if not more. And that just comes back to like the more data, the better, especially if you're going to start to like train your AI agents and models to like sound and speak and help you create this content. You need to give them as much as you possibly can. So these key messages are really important. So as you can see, like unlock Gen AI innovation for your users with one central hub for AI governance could be, a key message is like, okay, you can really help me consolidate a lot of this stuff, or just across the board. And we like to even just use these key messages as like ways to think about and talk about the product or company, but they can also just become straight up copy to use. Like you should just be taking this out and putting it onto your website pages, into your social, into your ads, like email, everywhere. And that's what I like about this too. It really helps you think of it in a more like integrated approach of like, how are we communicating this, not just, a one-to-one, but across all channels as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point too, is that your messaging guides should be actionable. You should be including honestly copy that you can copy and paste into messaging, not the only copy, but some starters so that people can really put it into use. And then you start testing that. So
for sure.
That's great.
Yeah. It's also just fun. Like, just like building it out, like a house. See here, got the roof, you got all the levels, go deeper, and everything. The other part that we always make sure that we talk about and make sure is really clear is like, so there's messaging, like the personality, the values of your company, but there's also like the voice, the tone of your brand. And this is really important. And I think it's a step that's often skipped. So what I'm showing here on screen is brand tone scores. So starting to define like, what are those almost like adjectives of how you would, if your company was a person, how would they sound? Like, what would they talk about? How would they write? And you can define these things. You can change. This is an example. So like, you're courageous, or are you cautious? Are you conversational or formal, witty or serious, enthusiastic or matter of fact? And I like the scoring method that we come up with. You can change this however you want, weight it however you want. but it's really helpful to like define these like kind of two sides of ways of the tone of speaking, or how you want the brand and anyone actually, because people will put their own like subjective way of speaking or talking or writing, but you want to have that consistency builds trust. So this helps make sure that things are consistent to your customers, to your leads, to your audience, wherever that you're interacting with them. And also, what we're realizing, this is extremely important and helpful to train generative AI models on. You have to be really, really specific and clear of how you want it to like sound, and how it should like, especially if you're using it for like content creation or editing. It's like, okay, you don't just say like, now rewrite the sentence.
Right.
You would need to be like, rewrite it to sound more conversational with a bit of a witty tone, but still be matter of fact about these specific topics. Like that context and that direction is very different, and you'll get the right outcome of it. I think that's where people need to spend. We're talking about like, you need to put in the legwork. You need to like spend time with it, train it. But this foundation of the brand tone and defining these is a way to get started, and really important to talk through. And not just, in the marketing team, like going back to what you were saying, Tucker, go talk to people at other departments, get your executive team's opinion, hear what customers are saying, how are people talking, what's kind of, try to bring all that together to boil it down to this.
Totally agree. Yeah. And just another use case is like, usually the person who's writing your social post is not, the head of your marketing department. That's another person who would really value this. We've talked before about how LinkedIn and social media is kind of the new front door of your company. And if, someone on social is using 15 exclamation points because they haven't aligned, oh, actually our tone is super analytical and serious, like that's a huge problem. So just another use case where like, I think sometimes people can be like, oh, brand tone and voice, do I really need to focus on that? Yes, because if you don't, you're going to have people talking in a way that doesn't sound at all like the brand you're going for. And going back to the slides earlier, where consistency, reliability is super important, you need to be delivering a consistent experience across the board. So yeah.
And it may sound like it's not authentic to say that you have to define what authenticity is for your company. Like, how do you follow my thought there?
Yeah, no, I do.
Like it's getting like an inception level there, but to be authentic, you have to identify like how are, like, what is authenticity to our company? Like, how are we authentic? What does that sound like? What does that look like?
Yes.
How do we show up in those ways? Not just in terms of the product, but actually like the way you communicate in person and online to your audience. Which brings us to the next point around audience, because we're talking about the brand. So sure, you have your company, really important to be very clear there, but it's just not going to resonate if you're not tailoring your messaging to specific audience personas.
Yep. Yeah.
So we brought this up. We don't have the specific messaging we have, but just as like to go a little bit deeper, we talked a lot about the pain points which you have here. But I find that talking being really clear of like, what are their goals in their role, or their common objections that they may give you, are some other really helpful ways to think through like the conversation you would have, and then kind of trying to dig into that emotional connection. It's like, is this person trying to get like a promotion at work? Okay, like, are they in a position where they're always trying to like up level? How do we make them look more like a champion? How can we offer them a solution that they can advance and really like advocate for us?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you added goals here too, because I think I've espoused the virtue of getting into pain points or challenges, but before you can even understand their pain points, you need to understand their goals and what their job is and what they're trying to do in their day to day. So I love that. And I find this one of the most fun things we do in our jobs is understanding everybody's little world and what they do. So that you can then say, oh, what are you trying to accomplish? Okay. And then what are those roadblocks? Okay. So now I understand your pain point. Now I understand how my solution can really help you. So yeah, I love starting with the goals here. I think that's so important when you're talking to different personas.
For sure. Yeah. And then also like, this is where you can have like adjust your voice and tone to the persona as well. So you have like, this is how we are as a company, but you can also get really, and you need to get really specific of like, how do we speak to these specific people, the specific persona? So maybe it's like a manager, they're not like a senior executive, it's like a manager level, want to come off a little bit more approachable,
Yep.
maybe be a little bit more coaching them, enthusiastic, bringing some humor and wit.
Yep.
Not don't and then also be like define what not to do. Like I think there's a lot of like being very clear of like try this, do more of this, but also less of like very formal language or like overwhelming them with too much information, like too many decisions to make because maybe they can't make all those decisions and then they'll feel, a little bit of imposter syndrome, whatever it is. Like the coming back to the emotion, like the emotion will come to play with this and how people are showing up and how they're making decisions, how they're kind of moving forward, what their priorities are in connection to like the company's priorities. So definitely defining these things. I think spend time here to just really like try as much as possible to get real data, but also just trying to put yourself in this like empathetic seat with your potential audience and customers.
Yep. Your leadership versus your practitioner versus your kind of domain owner all have very different goals, needs, pains, and things they want. So really getting super familiar with each of them is critical in order to kind of craft messaging that's actually going to motivate them, make them take action, and ultimately lead to a purchase.
For sure. So a lot of great information. Thank you, Tucker, for joining me on this episode of Call to Action. We covered, building out messaging frameworks, how to do it, giving a little bit of structure there, the importance of voice and tone, really connecting, doing the research of your audience and connecting with them at that emotional level. And then how AI is starting to fit into all this and how you can leverage it to just start to really go deeper, I think is a big part of it, and starting to use the tools, allow yourself to just advance and hopefully kind of scale things as much as you possibly can. So as we always do, we can sum it up with one call to action to our audience, just to recap the episode. I can start. I think I'll go with. I never plan these, by the way. These are always just like I don't plan them. It's like
I didn't know that.
Put it on the side. Like make sure to mention it. Just to give a little break down the fourth wall here a little for our audience. But I'll say my call to action to all of you listening today is actually organize your like data information. I think I keep thinking what you mentioned, Tucker, like, is your CRM clean? Like, what's the status? Like, audit your systems, make sure you have consent from folks to like process that data, and then use that to start to develop out research, analyze, synthesize that information to lead into building things like messaging frameworks.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And
what's yours, Tucker? Do you want to, you can
close
this out.
Of course. You mentioned Christopher Penn, and I want to give the recommendation to listeners and viewers to go check out Christopher Penn and then try his framework, that Rappel framework, when you're prompting AI. I think that's been really helpful for me. And I think that's just, I always like having a good framework to use when I'm trying something new. So go check out Christopher Penn and what he has to say about AI prompting, and then give it a go on whatever
Let us know. Yeah.
And let us know.
That's a good point. It's just like, go try it. Like, I think there's just a lot of like, I mean, if you can, like, I think that's a larger issue of like you have access to in your company or not. But if you do, and you can securely use these tools, like just start.
Yeah. Start. Just go do it.
Just go do it. Awesome. Well, of course, we'd love to hear from folks who are subscribed, listening to our episodes. Let us know, like, how are you approaching messaging, positioning, brand voice and tone at your company? Anything that you always make sure is part of that we're overlooking, we'd love to know. Also, like, what are ways you're planning to leverage generative AI with crafting your messaging, content creation, research, data analysis? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, as we all say, subscribe, like, stay in touch with us. We will be producing and consistently sharing call to action episodes throughout the year. But until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.